When people think about the fall of Rome, they imagine barbarians attacking the gates, legions collapsing, emperors being poisoned in marble palaces. I think empires do not only fall because of external attacks, they crumble from within. And their most destructive force is always money. Rome did not fall only because of invasions and corruption. It fell because its money collapsed. And the lessons from that collapse are still valid today for every modern economy that plays with money and thinks it will not pay the price. Let us set the scene. For centuries, the economic backbone of Rome was the silver denarius. It began to be minted around 201 BC, was almost pure silver, and was trusted across the empire. Soldiers were paid with it. Merchants wanted it. Ordinary people saved with it. The denarius was not just money, it was a tangible sense of trust. The power of the empire and the value of its money were tied together. People believed in Rome just as they believed in its money. But ruling an empire is expensive. Legions must be paid, roads and aqueducts must be built, wars must be financed. By the 2nd century AD, Rome had begun to strain itself. It was defending its borders, resisting the Parthians in the east, and dealing with internal rebellions. Taxes could not keep up with military spending, so the emperors turned to an old trick, debasing the currency. Instead of the unpopular method of taxing citizens more, they reduced the silver content in the denarius. The numbers tell the whole story. Under Emperor Augustus, the denarius contained about 95% silver. By the beginning of the 3rd century, that ratio had fallen to around 50%. By the time of Emperor Gallienus, it had dropped below 5%. A coin that had once been almost solid silver became a thinly silver-coated bronze disc. People saw and felt this. Then inflation appeared. Since the money was no longer tied to real value, prices rose. A measure of wheat that once cost 1 denarius suddenly cost dozens of denarii. This was not a theoretical issue. It was ruining the lives of ordinary Romans. Soldiers demanded higher pay because of the rising cost of living. Merchants began refusing the debased money and preferred barter or payment in gold instead. Local economies returned to direct exchange because money was no longer reliable. As trust declined, emperors kept minting cheaper coins, thinking that quantity would replace value. This was a vicious cycle, the same one we see repeatedly in history. The crisis peaked during what is known as the crisis of the 3rd century. Between AD 235 and 284, Rome spent almost 50 years in chaos, invasions, plagues, civil wars, and economic collapse. Emperors came and went. Some ruled only a few months before being killed. Behind all this political drama stood a corrupted monetary system. Taxes were demanded in money that was constantly losing value. Farmers abandoned their land rather than pay. Trade networks broke apart, and the Roman state began taking desperate measures to keep the system alive. Price controls, forced labor obligations. None of it worked. One emperor, Diocletian, tried to stop the bleeding. In AD 301, he issued the Edict on Maximum Prices, fixing the prices of thousands of goods and services, from grain to wages. Those who disobeyed would be punished with death. The edict was a complete disaster. When money is worthless, you cannot fix prices by decree. The black market exploded and official trade nearly collapsed. People quickly learned this. The law cannot repair broken money. Eventually, Rome abandoned the denarius completely. Constantine the Great introduced the solidus, a pure gold coin, around AD 312. This coin brought stability for a time, especially in the Eastern Roman, or Byzantine, Empire. But by then the Western Roman Empire was already fatally weakened. The debasement of the denarius had hollowed out Rome's economic core. Armies could no longer be sustained. Trade networks had fractured and trust had vanished. The fall of Rome was not a single event. It was a long unraveling. And the collapse of its monetary system was one of the sharpest threads in that unraveling. So what does this mean for us today? This: the destruction of money is the destruction of empires. Rome thought it could deceive people with money, creating coins that looked the same but contained less real value. Modern states think they can do the same by printing money, manipulating interest rates, and trying to dissolve debts through inflation. And the result is always the same. People pay the price, wealth disappears, and trust collapses. Rome learned this lesson the hard way. If we ignore it, we will face the same end. History did not stop teaching when Rome fell. Every major inflation crisis since then has repeated the same pattern. Governments debase money to cover expenses, elites protect themselves with real assets, and ordinary people become poorer. Rome's monetary crisis is merely the earliest and most full-scale example, like a blueprint for collapse. When we fast forward to the 20th century, the echoes are deafening. After World War I, Germany was burdened with heavy reparations under the Treaty of Versailles. To cover its debts, the government printed money just as Rome had minted more coins. By 1923, hyperinflation had spiraled out of control. The price of a loaf of bread that had been 1 mark before the war rose to 200 billion marks by autumn that year. People carried their wages home in wheelbarrows. Pensioners starved because their savings had vanished. And just as in Rome, those who owed debts saw them erased, while those who held real assets, land, factories, foreign currency became even more powerful. Money became meaningless. Economic despair fueled political extremism, paving the way for Hitler's rise. Zimbabwe followed the same path in the early 2000s. Facing land seizures, falling production, and mounting debt, the government turned to printing money. By 2008, inflation had reached unimaginable levels, 89.76 billion% annually. Prices doubled every day. Stores could not change price tags fast enough. Eventually, Zimbabwe abandoned its own currency entirely, and people began trading in US dollars or South African rand. Once again, a government thought it could trick reality. Once again, the people paid the price. And you do not have to look only at these 3 examples. Even in modern developed economies, the Roman model remains alive. Consider the United States. In 1971, President Richard Nixon severed the dollar from the gold standard, cutting the last tie between money and a tangible store of value.